welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Joan, a double major student pursuing psychology and English at Christ University, Delhi NCR. Today I'd like to introduce Jane Eyre, a novel by Charlotte Brontë, and explain the storyline using two important elements, mimicry and cultural hybridity. I will also be going into how Bronte takes the readers through this Bildungsroman by showing us how Jane grows and takes back her personal agency by navigating her life through the ideal Victorian Christian morality, social hierarchy, Victorian femininity, norms, expectations, standards, etc. To understand a little bit about the story before we head into its analysis and the themes by which we're trying to understand the novel, I would like to introduce how Jane's entire life pans out in the novel. The novel Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë takes the reader through Jane Eyre's life, opening the storyline with her childhood at Gateshead with her abusive aunt and cousins since she was an orphan, then her shift to Lowood boarding school where she gains a true friend, Helen Burns, and over time discovers her passion for teaching at the institution much later on. The story then shows her move to Thornfield Hall at Mr. Rochester's as a governess for his ward Adele. Her outlook towards life, the way she is treated by people as she stays in at Mr. Rochester's, and the many diverse experiences that she has that changes her as a person, how she understands her self-worth and how she places herself and views herself in society, considering the Victorian standards of social class and position and social hierarchy. All of this truly shaped her and became a fundamental part, a shaping part of her life. Uh, that is the specific time that she spent at Mr. Rochester's at the Thornfield Hall. Her outlook towards life and many aspects of herself changes during and post her time at the Thornfield Hall. So, the two main theories that have been applied to the story to understand the text and the relevance of the characters and to really give a backbone to the entire novel. The theories used here include mimicry and cultural hybridity. Mimicry is a literary device widely used by authors to parody, imitate, to reproduce a specific style, tone, etc., by showing the masks put on by the characters. It guides the readers to view the text, its constituents, and layers through different critical lenses. It adds to the depth of each character by exposing how societal norms, standards, and expectations mold their behaviors and perspectives. Mimicry in itself helps us understand the different personas or the masks that each of the characters put on to be socially acceptable or to be appeasing in a social situation or to fit in according to the class expectations or the social hierarchy expectations and standards that the Victorian society held for each of them. Moving on to the next element or the next lens by which we are trying to understand the novel, which is cultural hybridity. The term in itself was introduced by Bhabha, wherein he refers to this space as a contact zone or a middle ground or a third space that is created by the mixing of two contrasting cultures, eventually, where both ends, the polar ends, disown or reject the third space or this contact zone. This space holds entirely novel values, behaviors, culture, histories, narratives, lifestyles, and individual stories which are formed as a result of the intercultural interaction. Moving forward, we will integrate these elements to understand how they work in the entire story and look into some of the characters to gain a better understanding of this. Mimicry. Here, mimicry worked not only at levels of colonialism but much deeper into class, gender roles, expectations, spaces, into religion, social behaviors, etc. We see how it works into religion with the Victorian Christian morality that was brought in by the many people that influenced Jane from her childhood. Be it her aunt, Mrs. Reed at Gateshead, who, even though she mistreated her, was deeply connected to the church and was involved in the Catholic Church's the activities of the church and was a great participant in the church. Another part is how we see that our expectations of Jane, her being a woman in that society, and being required to be obedient, quiet, submissive, gentle, and morally pure, and her trying to navigate her life through each of these phases where the society and the people require of her to fit into a particular persona, a mask, or into a particular needed social role. We see how she navigates through each of these phases, where she tries to mimic a certain mask or a persona to be socially acceptable or to be accepted and wanted to feel as though she belongs into those classes, into the position where she wishes to be. Each character in this entire novel, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë, glimpses gives us glimpses of Victorian norms that each of the characters do to gain approval, power, privilege, to survive or escape consequences. This was most visible in Jane by learning socially acceptable behaviors and living up to those standards. At any point along the storyline, we see these fractured attempts in her reality, be it all throughout her boarding school life, where she desperately mimicked Christian values due to the influence of her friend Helen, or much later, where she attempts to mimic Blanche Ingram's aristocratic elegance, gentleness, and feminine refinement because she held deep feelings for Mr. Rochester. There existed Victorian ideals of femininity that Jane was expected to conform to as the obedient, quiet, submissive, gentle, and morally pure woman, which was generally considered in the Victorian society as the ideal woman. Although her mimicry was not as perfect as she had desired, she later adapts to what she considered as proper and disciplined her emotions, expressions, and behavior to fit that box. The next element that we will be looking at is cultural hybridity. In the story, we see how Jane is a deeply feeling person and is largely led by her heart. She fixes and finds a contact zone between her heart and the moral values that have been shaped and put into her mind and her heart and into her lifestyle by the Victorian society. She created a third space where she balanced her emotions and the sense of duty that she held. By adopting parts of Victorian Christian morality, femininity, social conduct, etc., she exists in a contact zone between those ends. It is in such a space that she is able to gather the courage to reject Rochester's hand in marriage after discovering a dreadful truth and rejecting uh, and rejecting her cousin St. John's missionary proposal, even though it aligned with morals of Christianity that she was taught. The presence of Bertha Mason, another character who deeply influenced a huge turn in Jane Eyre's life in the novel, was that Bertha Mason, Mr. Rochester's first wife, who was said to have gone mad. She was portrayed with a deep sense of racial and cultural hybridity, with details of her having a Jamaican background and therefore a non English background. And then this perspective, this narrative was added to by the details of her behavior, which were termed as or understood as uncontrollable animalistic behaviors. This gave a glimpse of the English society's othering of such people by creating a narrative of them being dangerous, but also how Rochester and his family accepted her. Therefore, Bertha Mason being in this third space, this contact zone, where she is othered and not fully accepted as one's own or as an in group member, but at the same time exists in this third space, this contact zone, where she is given this pretense acceptance while she is kept away from the family and locked in a room upstairs. The entire reflection using these two elements helps us understand four major things as we come to the conclusion of understanding this text. Firstly, Jane Eyre, the text, reflects cultural hybridity and mimicry through her position in social class, upbringing, and equation with many people like Mr. Rochester, St. John, Bertha Mason, etc. She eventually regains her personal agency, which in all her life was shaped by the people around her and her close ones. be it Mrs. Reed, her aunt, when she was really young, or her close friend Helen Burns while she was at the Lowood boarding school, or much later on when she was at the Thornfield Hall and she was in a great scale influenced and moved by Mr. Rochester's actions, especially since she was deeply in love with him. And much later on, we see how she has to escape from the Thornfield Hall and she stays under the care of St. John and his sisters. In each of these phases, even towards the end, when she's able to form a stronger sense of identity and understanding of herself and how she wishes to go through life forward, we see how she regains this sense of personal agency and finds this third space where she follows her heart and keeps the sense of duty that she holds. Jane's use of mimicry by attempting to toe the line with Victorian morals and values showed how it worked as her fundamental means of survival more than just as an act of being socially acceptable. Together, both these elements work as a backbone to the novel and added depth to the layers of each character and how they showed the different facets of Victorian society. Here are some clips from the Jane Eyre movie released in 2011. Thank you, and I hope the understanding of this text was helpful and simple, especially with the two elements that were used here, which were cultural hybridity and mimicry. Thank you.